Question 1. During a critical transition period where existing processes must align with legal formalities, a testator drafts will leave in their entire estate to a charitable trust. However, they will lack signatures from the required number of witnesses under state law. A month later, the testator unexpectedly passes away. How will the court likely rule regarding the validity of the charitable trust created through the will? A. The trust is valid because the testator's intent is clear and charitable trusts are generally favored in law. B. The trust is invalid because the will fails to meet the required formalities for execution. C. The trust is valid under the doctrine of substantial compliance, which allows minor deviations if intent is clear. D. The trust is invalid, but the court may impose constructive trust in favor of the intended charity. Answer. B. The trust is invalid because the will fails to meet the required formalities for execution. Explanation. Under the statute of wills, a will must typically be signed by the testator and witnessed by a specific number of competent witnesses, often 2 or 3, depending on jurisdiction. If the will is not executed in compliance with these formalities, it is generally deemed invalid. This means that any provisions within the will, including the trust, fail. Option is incorrect because while charitable trusts are favored, they must still be properly established through a valid instrument. Option C is incorrect because most states do not recognize the doctrine of substantial compliance for wills. Strict adherence is required. Option D is incorrect because constructive trust is typically imposed in cases of fraud or unjust enrichment, not for rectifying failed testamentary intent due to improper execution. Relevant law: Uniform Probate Code SS 502, which governs will execution requirements and common law principles regarding charitable trusts and probate validity. Question 2. While managing a hybrid approach where timing issues affect estate distributions, an executor encounters a dispute over a spendthrift trust created in the decedent's will. The trust provides that the beneficiary may not transfer their interest and that creditors cannot reach the trust assets. However, major creditor argues that the beneficiary should use trust distributions to settle substantial debt. How should the court likely rule? A. The creditor can access the trust assets because the beneficiary has legal right to receive distributions. B. The creditor cannot access the trust assets due to the spendthrift clause, but may garnish distributions after they are paid. C. The trust is invalid as it improperly restrains creditors, violating public policy. D. The creditor can reach the trust assets if the beneficiary voluntarily agrees to waive the spendthrift protection. Answer. B. The creditor cannot access the trust assets due to the spendthrift clause, but may garnish distributions after they are paid. Explanation. Spendthrift provisions prevent both voluntary and involuntary transfers of a beneficiary's interest before distributions are made. However, once distribution has been made, the funds are no longer part of the trust and may be subject to creditor claims. Option is incorrect because the creditor cannot directly attach trust assets while they remain in the trust. Option C is incorrect because spendthrift clauses are widely recognized under Restatement Third of Trusts in the Uniform Trust Code SS. Option D is incorrect because beneficiaries generally cannot unilaterally waive spendthrift protections, as these provisions are meant to shield assets from imprudent financial decisions. Relevant law: Uniform Trust Code SSS 501-503, which outlines spendthrift protections and creditor rights, and case law precedent regarding discretionary versus mandatory trust distributions. Question 3. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a court is asked to modify an irrevocable trust based on unforeseen circumstances. The trust, established decades ago, was meant to provide for the settler's descendants but does not account for modern financial challenges such as inflation and high medical costs. Several beneficiaries petitioned the court to adjust the trust terms for increased flexibility in distributions. Under what legal doctrine might the court grant their request? A. The rule against perpetuities, which limits the duration of trusts. B. The Cypress doctrine, which allows modification of charitable trusts. C. The doctrine of deviation, which permits modification of administrative terms due to unanticipated circumstances. D. The spendthrift rule, which restricts changes to beneficiary rights. Answer. C. The doctrine of deviation, which permits modification of administrative terms due to unanticipated circumstances. Explanation. The The doctrine of deviation allows courts to modify a trust's terms if compliance with the original terms becomes impractical or inconsistent with the settler's intent due to unforeseen circumstances. In this case, financial conditions have changed significantly since the trust was created, and the court may allow modifications to ensure the beneficiary's welfare while staying true to the trust's original purpose. Option is incorrect because the rule against perpetuities limits the duration of trust but does not allow for modifications based on financial circumstances. Option B is incorrect because the Cypress doctrine applies only to charitable trusts, not private family trusts. Option D is incorrect because spendthrift provisions restrict beneficiary access but do not govern trust modifications. Relevant law. Restatement 3rd of Trusts SS, which provides for the doctrine of deviation, and Uniform Trust Code UTRA SS, which allows courts to modify trust provisions in response to unforeseen changes. Question 4. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, an estate planner discovers that a testator's will includes complex series of bequests, some of which conflict with statutory intestacy rules and public policy principles. The will provides that the testator's real estate holdings shall be distributed to their children in equal shares, but one clause states that if any child contests the will, they will be disinherited entirely. Another provision grants substantial portion of the estate to private trust designed to support only direct male descendants of the testator, explicitly excluding female heirs. Given the laws governing wills and estate planning, which of the following statements is most accurate? A. The testator's clause disinheriting any child who contests the will is enforceable in all jurisdictions because it protects the testator's intent and discourages unnecessary litigation. B. The clause disinheriting contesting child may be enforced in some jurisdictions, but courts may choose to override it if the challenge is brought in good faith and based on reasonable grounds. C. The clause excluding female heirs from the private trust is valid. Freedom of disposition, as testators have the right to dictate who will benefit from their estate. D. Since intestacy laws apply only in the absence of valid will, any provisions contradicting them are automatically invalid. Answer. B. The clause disinheriting a contesting child may be enforced in some jurisdictions, but courts may choose to override it if the challenge is brought in good faith and based on reasonable grounds. Explanation. No contest clause. While no contest or interim clauses are generally enforceable in many jurisdictions, courts may override them if the challenge is brought in good faith and there is a reasonable basis. Allegations of undue influence or lack of capacity. Many states, including California and Florida, follow this principle. Gender discrimination in trusts. The clause excluding female heirs is highly problematic under public policy. Courts may find such a restriction invalid as it violates principles of equal protection and anti-discrimination laws, particularly under the Uniform Trust Code that are uncertain constitutional principles. Intestacy rules versus will provisions. Wills can override intestacy rules. However, a will provision violating statutory protections, e.g. spousal elective share, forced heirship laws, may be struck down. Question 5. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, a probate court encounters a situation where a decedent's will contains ambiguous language regarding bequest to charity. The will states, I leave $500,000 to the Cancer Research Foundation, but fails to specify which foundation. There are multiple organizations with similar names and competing claims have arisen. Additionally, the will general residuary clause stating that any property not specifically bequeathed should pass to the decedent's niece. Which legal principle is most likely to govern the resolution of this dispute? A. The doctrine of Cypress will allow the court to select the most appropriate charitable organization to receive the bequest. B. The gift will fail entirely due to lack of certainty in identifying the intended beneficiary, and the $500,000 will revert to the residuary estate. C. The court will apply intestacy laws to distribute the $500,000 since the bequest is vague and cannot be given effect. D. The niece, as residuary beneficiary, has the strongest claim to the funds because the will does not precisely identify recipient. Answer. A. The doctrine of Cypress will allow the court to select the most appropriate charitable organization to receive the bequest. Explanation. Doctrine of Cypress. This doctrine applies when a charitable bequest is ambiguous or becomes impossible to fulfill. Courts will attempt to honor the testator's intent by selecting similar charitable organization that aligns with the stated purpose. This is well-established principle in trust and estate law, especially cases where the testator's intent is clear, but details are missing, failure of gift, and residuary clause. While gift may fail if there is no identifiable beneficiary, courts typically avoid this outcome by applying cypres or other equitable doctrines. Intestacy laws do not apply. Since the will has general residuary clause, intestacy rules do not come into play unless the entire will is deemed invalid. Question 6. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a trustee managing an irrevocable trust is faced with an urgent decision regarding trust assets. The trust instrument grants the trustee discretionary authority to distribute funds for health, education, maintenance, and support (HEMS) of the beneficiaries. However, one of the beneficiaries, facing personal financial crisis due to medical emergency, requests significant distribution beyond normal maintenance and support. The trustee is uncertain whether this request falls within the scope of the trust's discretionary standard. How should the trustee proceed under standard trust law principles? A. The trustee must strictly interpret the trust and deny the request, as the funds are meant for ordinary support, not extraordinary expenses. B. The trustee should consider the beneficiary's circumstances and may approve the distribution if it aligns with the HEMS standard. C. The trustee is prohibited from making any discretionary decisions without explicit court approval. D. The trustee can grant any amount requested by the beneficiary as long as there is enough money in the trust. Answer. B. The trustee should consider the beneficiary's circumstances and may approve the distribution if it aligns with the HEMS standard. Explanation. HEMS standard. This is common distribution standard used to provide trustees with guidance while protecting trust assets. Courts interpret health, education, maintenance, and support, broadly meaning extraordinary medical expenses could qualify. Discretionary nature. Trustees are given the power to reasonable judgments, but they must still act in the best interest of all beneficiaries. They should consider trust resources, the long-term sustainability of distributions, and fairness among beneficiaries. Court involvement. Trustees generally do not need court approval unless there is ambiguity or dispute. Question 7. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with evolving legal standards, an estate administrator encounters a case where a testator attempted to execute a holographic handwritten will, but the document was signed only by the testator without any witness signatures. The jurisdiction follows the Uniform Probate Code with a harmless error provision allowing courts to validate defective wills if there is clear and convincing evidence. Intent. Which of the following statements is most accurate regarding the validity of the will? A. The will is invalid because all wills must have two witnesses to be legally enforceable. B. The will may still be admitted to probate if clear and convincing evidence demonstrates that the testator intended it to serve as their final will. C. The will is automatically invalid because holographic wills are never recognized under the Uniform Probate Code. D. The document will be treated as mere draft and cannot be given any legal effect. Answer. B. The will may still be admitted to probate if clear and convincing evidence demonstrates that the testator intended it to serve as their final will. Explanation. Holographic wills and harmless error rule. The IC allows for flexibility in validating wills that fail to meet strict formal requirements. If there is clear and convincing evidence that the testator intended the document to serve as their will, courts may admit it to probate under the harmless doctrine witness requirement. While traditional wills require witnesses, some jurisdictions recognize handwritten wills without witnesses, provided they meet statutory standards. Legal evolution. Many modern probate codes have moved away from rigid formalism to ensure the testator's intent is honored, reducing unnecessary will contests. Question 8. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, an estate planning attorney discovers that a revocable living trust has conflicting provisions regarding asset distribution. The settlor initially designated equal shares for all beneficiaries, but later added an amendment favoring one beneficiary over others. The document does not specify whether the latest amendment should override prior provisions. How should the attorney the correct distribution method? A. The most recent amendment automatically controls as it represents the settlor's latest intent. B. The original trust document prevails unless the amendment explicitly revokes prior conflicting terms. C. The trust is rendered invalid due to inconsistency and assets must be distributed according to intestacy laws. D. The beneficiaries must reach unanimous agreement or petition the court for clarification. Answer. B. The original trust document prevails unless the amendment explicitly revokes prior conflicting terms. Explanation. Trust amendments A properly executed amendment can modify a trust, but it must explicitly state its intent to override prior terms. Courts typically uphold the latest valid amendment if it clearly revokes earlier provisions. Settlers' intent. Courts favor honoring settlers' intent, provided that the amendment was voluntarily, without undue influence, and follows legal requirements. Resolution. If ambiguity remains, beneficiaries may seek judicial determination. Question 9. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, an executor discovers that the decedent will leave specific bequests to certain beneficiaries, but the estate lacks sufficient assets to fulfill all distributions. Given the order of abatement rules, which assets should be reduced first? A. Residual gift should be reduced before specific bequests. B. All gifts must be reduced proportionally regardless of type. C. Specific bequests must be reduced first, followed by general bequests, then residual gifts. D. General bequests are reduced first, followed by specific bequests, with residual beneficiaries receiving what remains. Answer. D. General bequests are reduced first, followed by specific bequests, with residual beneficiaries receiving what remains. Explanation. Abatement order. In cases of insufficient assets, general bequests, monetary gifts, abate before specific bequests, unique assets. Residual beneficiaries receive what remains after all specific and general bequests are satisfied. Equitable treatment. Courts aim to preserve specific gifts when possible, as they typically reflect the testator's strongest intentions. Question 10. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a conservator managing an incapacitated individual's estate must decide whether to liquidate certain investment assets to cover medical expenses. The conservatorship agreement provides discretionary authority but requires actions to align with the ward's best financial interests. What is the most appropriate course of action? A. Immediately sell the highest value assets to ensure liquidity. B. Review the ward's overall financial plan and consult financial advisors before making decision. C. Avoid any asset sales without direct court approval. D. Allocate personal funds to cover medical expenses instead of liquidating estate assets. Answer. B. Review the ward's overall financial plan and consult financial advisors before making decision. Explanation. Fiduciary duty. Conservators must act in the ward's best financial interests and seek professional guidance for major financial decisions. Preserving assets. Selling investments should be last resort after exploring alternative options. Question 11. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with evolving legal standards, a testator attempted to execute a digital will using an online platform. The will was electronically signed and stored in cloud storage but lacks traditional witness signatures. The jurisdiction does not explicitly recognize electronic wills. What legal principle is most relevant in determining its validity? A. The harmless error doctrine may allow the court to validate the will if intent is proven. B. Digital wills are universally recognized and should be admitted to probate without issue. C. The will is invalid unless explicitly authorized by state law. D. A new handwritten will must be drafted to meet statutory requirements. Answer A. The harmless error doctrine may allow the court to validate the will if intent is proven. Explanation. Harmless error rule. Some states permit validation of defective wills if clear and convincing evidence supports the testator's intent. Electronic wills, while not universally recognized, evolving legal frameworks increasingly accommodate digital estate planning. Question 12. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, an estate trustee discovers that trust income distributions are inconsistently recorded, leading to potential tax complications. What is the best course of action to correct these discrepancies? A. Amend previous tax filings and notify beneficiaries of necessary adjustments. B. Distribute additional funds to balance past inconsistencies. C. Suspend all distributions until an external audit is completed. D. Terminate the trust and distribute remaining assets to avoid future issues. Answer A. Amend previous tax filings and notify beneficiaries of necessary adjustments. Explanation. Tax compliance. Trustees must correct errors by amending records and informing affected parties. Audits and legal risks. Suspending distributions without cause or terminating the trust prematurely may violate fiduciary obligations. Question 13. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, a probate court must resolve a dispute over whether a handwritten letter can serve as a will codicil. The letter lacks witness signatures but expresses clear intent to modify specific provisions of the existing will. Which legal doctrine may support its validity? A. The incorporation by reference doctrine. B. The dependent relative revocation doctrine. C. The ademption rule. D. The statutory intestacy rule. Answer A. The incorporation by reference doctrine. Explanation: incorporation by reference. If an extraneous document is mentioned in a valid will and clearly intended to modify it, courts may recognize it as part of the testamentary instrument. Question 14. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a guardian must determine whether a minor's inheritance should be accessed early to cover education expenses. What is the most prudent legal approach? A. File petition with the court requesting approval for early withdrawal. B. Use the funds immediately, as education expenses qualify as necessity. C. Transfer the inheritance into personal account for easier management. D. Defer all withdrawals until the minor reaches legal adulthood. Answer A. File a petition with the court requesting approval for early withdrawal. Explanation: guardian duties. Any major financial decisions involving a minor's inheritance typically require court approval. Question 15. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with evolving legal standards, a family discovers a lost safe deposit box containing a previously unknown will. The decedent's estate has already been distributed based on intestacy laws. What is the most appropriate legal response? A. Seek court approval to reopen probate and determine the new will's validity. B. Ignore the new will, as the estate has already been settled. C. Require all beneficiaries to voluntarily redistribute assets. D. Assume the new will is invalid due to the timing of its discovery. Answer A. Seek court approval to reopen probate and determine the new will's validity. Explanation: reopening probate, if valid, what is discovered post-distribution, courts may allow estate reallocation. Question 16. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, an executor identifies that real property titled in joint tenancy was not properly disclosed during probate. How should this be rectified? A. File a petition to correct the estate inventory and update records. B. Sell the property and distribute proceeds equally among heirs. C. Ignore the issue as joint tenancy assets bypass probate. D. Transfer ownership to the estate's residuary beneficiaries. Answer A. File a petition to correct the estate inventory and update records. Explanation: joint tenancy and probate. While such assets usually transfer outside probate, proper documentation ensures legal compliance. Question 17. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, a lawyer discovers that a will includes an outdated provision that gifts non-existent assets. What rule applies? A. The doctrine of ademption. B. The per stirps distribution rule. C. The elective share principle. D. The anti-lapse statute. Answer A. The doctrine of ademption. Explanation: ademption. If a specific bequest no longer exists, courts usually rule it has been revoked by extinction. Question 18. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, an estate executor discovers that a testator's will references separate list of personal property bequests. However, the list is unsigned and was found in desk drawer after the testator's passing. The will does not explicitly incorporate the list by reference. What is the most appropriate legal approach in this situation? A. The list is automatically invalid since it lacks signature. B. The court may recognize the list as valid separate writing if state law allows. C. The executor should distribute personal property according to their best judgment. D. The residuary beneficiaries should determine how to divide the personal property. Answer B. The court may recognize the list as a valid separate writing if state law allows. Explanation: incorporation by reference. Some states allow separate writings to guide distribution of personal property if referenced in a properly executed will, even if the list itself is unsigned. State law considerations. Jurisdictions vary. Some require explicit reference in the will, while others allow informal lists if they reflect the testator's intent. Executor's duty. The executor must follow legal guidelines rather than distributing property based on personal judgment. If the list is deemed invalid, the property typically passes under the residuary clause of the will. Question 19. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, an attorney realizes that a trust document does not specify what should happen if A named beneficiary predecesses the settlor. The trust assets include both specific bequests and residual distributions. How should the trustee determine asset distribution? A. The trustee should distribute the deceased beneficiaries' share equally among the remaining beneficiaries. B. The trustee should follow the default anti-lapse statute, if applicable. C. The trust automatically terminates and assets revert to the settlor's heirs. D. The court must decide how to allocate the assets based on common law principles. Answer. B. The trustee should follow the default anti-lapse statute, if applicable. Explanation. Anti-lapse statutes. Many states have laws preventing a bequest from lapsing if a beneficiary predecesses the settlor, allowing the deceased beneficiaries' descendants to inherit. Trust interpretation. If the trust lacks contingency plan, default state laws or judicial interpretation will determine the outcome. Judicial involvement. Courts only intervene if no legal precedent applies. Question 20. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a trustee must decide whether to delay trust distributions due to stock market instability. The trust grants the trustee broad discretion but instructs them to make regular income distributions to beneficiaries. What is the most prudent legal course of action? A. Suspend all distributions until market conditions stabilize. B. Continue making income distributions but temporarily withhold principal distributions. C. Convert all investments to cash to ensure liquidity. D. Seek court approval before making any modifications to distribution schedules. Correct answer. B. Continue making income distributions but temporarily withhold principal distributions. Explanation. Fiduciary duty. Trustees must balance prudent financial management with their duty to beneficiaries. Income versus principal distributions. Income distributions generally cannot be suspended without cause, while principal distributions may be adjusted based on market risks. Trustee discretion. Trustees have flexibility in managing trust assets, but must document decisions and act in beneficiaries' best interests. Question 21. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with evolving legal standards, a decedent's handwritten will lacks witness signatures but was signed and dated. The jurisdiction follows strict statutory formalities. What is the best course of action for the executor? A. Submit the will to probate, arguing that it qualifies as holographic will. B. Disregard the will and distribute assets under intestacy laws. C. Request all potential heirs to agree to the will's validity informally. D. Seek legislative reform to allow handwritten wills without witnesses. Answer. A. Submit the will to probate, arguing that it qualifies as a holographic will. Explanation. Holographic wills. Some states allow handwritten wills without witnesses if they are entirely in the testator's handwriting and signed. Statutory variants. If the jurisdiction recognizes holographic wills, probate courts may validate the document despite missing witnesses. An executor's role. Executors must follow legal procedures rather than rely on informal agreements or legislative changes. Question 22. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, a corporate fiduciary administering a special needs trust identifies a conflict between the trust's terms and government benefit eligibility rules. The trust provides discretionary distributions, but some distributions may disqualify the beneficiary from public assistance. How should the fiduciary proceed? A. Modify distributions to ensure compliance with public assistance regulations. B. Continue making distributions as specified, regardless of impact on benefits. C. Transfer the trust assets to the beneficiary outright to avoid complexity. D. Seek court approval before modifying the distribution plan. Answer. A. Modify distributions to ensure compliance with public assistance regulations. Explanation. Special needs trusts. These are designed to supplement rather than replace government benefits. Trustees must structure distributions carefully to avoid disqualifying the beneficiary. Fiduciary responsibility. The trustee must adapt to regulatory requirements while fulfilling trust obligations. Question 23. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, a probate court encounters a dispute over whether a spouse can claim an elective share against a trust that was created outside of the probate estate. What is the legal issue at stake? A. Whether the trust is considered part of the elective estate under state law. B. Whether the spouse waived their elective share rights in a prenuptial agreement. C. Whether the decedent intended for the spouse to receive no inheritance. D. Whether the trust is valid if it was funded during the decedent's lifetime. Answer A. Whether the trust is considered part of the elective estate under state law. Explanation. Elective share rights. Some states include certain non-probate assets like revocable trusts in the elective share calculation to prevent disinheriting a spouse. Legal interpretation. Courts may analyze whether the trust was a genuine estate planning tool or an attempt to evade statutory spousal rights. Question 24. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a court-appointed conservator must decide whether to use the ward's assets to cover the ward's dependent family members' medical expenses. The conservatorship order does not explicitly grant such authority. What is the most appropriate action? A. Use the ward's assets for the dependent family members' needs. B. Seek court approval before making any distributions. C. Deny all requests for financial assistance to third parties. D. Transfer conservatorship funds to discretionary trust. Answer. B. Seek court approval before making any distributions. Explanation. Conservators' authority. Conservators manage the ward's finances strictly for the ward's benefit unless court approved. Legal limitations. Even if family support seems reasonable, conservators must obtain legal authorization before using estate funds for third parties. Question 25. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with evolving legal standards, a digital will is stored in an encrypted email folder without a traditional signature. The jurisdiction has not adopted electronic or statutes. What is the best legal argument for admitting the will to probate? A. The harmless error doctrine should allow probate if intent is proven. B. The will is invalid unless state law explicitly allows digital wills. C. Electronic documents cannot constitute a will under any circumstances. D. The testator's digital signature should be presumed valid by default. Answer A. The harmless error doctrine should allow probate if intent is proven. Explanation. Harmless error doctrine. Some courts validate defective wills if clear intent can be demonstrated. Legal precedent. While electronic wills are not universally recognized, evolving case law may permit exceptions. Question 26. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, a trust protector is asked to amend a trust's terms due to unforeseen changes in tax law. What is the key legal consideration in determining whether such modification is permissible? A. The trust protector's authority as defined in the trust document. B. Whether the beneficiaries unanimously consent to the change. C. Whether the change aligns with the settler's original intent. D. Whether the trustee also agrees with the amendment. Answer A. The trust protector's authority as defined in the trust document. Explanation. Trust protectors. These individuals may modify trust terms if explicitly authorized. Legal boundaries. Courts examine whether modifications exceed the trust protector's powers. Question 27. During a comprehensive review of a process that needs improvement, an executor realizes that a recently deceased testator's will includes residuary clause but does not specifically mention digital assets. The testator had extensive cryptocurrency holdings and online business accounts. How should the executor proceed? A. Assume that digital assets pass under the residuary clause and distribute accordingly. B. Petition the probate court for guidance on handling digital assets. C. Treat the digital assets as abandoned property and turn them over to the state. D. Seek to recover access to the digital assets through the testator's online account credentials. Answer. B. Petition the probate court for guidance on handling digital assets. Explanation. Digital assets and estate planning. Many jurisdictions now recognize digital assets as part of an estate, but if the will is silent, courts may need to clarify their disposition. Legal precedents and statutory laws. Some states have enacted laws like the revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act (RUFIDA), which outlines how exec can manage digital property, security and access issues. Even if the executor has access to the deceased's login credentials, unauthorized account access may violate terms of service agreements or cybersecurity laws. Question 28. While analyzing the root causes of sequential problems in estate administration, an attorney handling probate realizes that the testator's revocable trust conflicts with the terms of jointly held real estate title. The trust names different beneficiaries than the owner of the property. What is the best course of action? A. Transfer the property according to the terms of the trust. B. Follow the joint ownership agreement as it supersedes the trust. C. Distribute the property equally among both the trust and the co-owners. D. File petition with the court to resolve the conflicting ownership claims. Answer. B. Follow the joint ownership agreement as it supersedes the trust. Explanation: joint tenancy versus trusts. If a property is held in joint tenancy with right of survivorship, it automatically transfers to the surviving owner regardless of the trust's terms. Legal hierarchy of documents. Joint ownership agreements typically take precedence over wills and trusts because they reflect contractual agreement between co-owners. Estate planning pitfalls. This issue highlights the importance of ensuring that trust documents and ownership structures are aligned to avoid disputes. Question 29. During an emergency response where multiple areas are impacted, a trustee of a charitable remainder trust (CRT) must decide whether to accelerate distributions to beneficiaries facing financial hardship. However, the trust contains strict payout provisions. What is the most legally sound course of action? A. Modify the distribution schedule to provide emergency assistance. B. Adhere to the trust terms and make no changes without court approval. C. Convert the CRT into a discretionary trust for flexibility. D. Request the IRS to approve temporary modifications due to financial hardship. Answer: B. Adhere to the trust terms and make no changes without court approval. Explanation: charitable remainder trust (CRT) restriction ERTS are governed by both state law and federal tax regulations. Any modification to payout schedules can violate ERLs, risking loss of tax-exempt status. Legal obligations of trustees. Trustees must strictly follow the trust's distribution terms unless court order permits changes. Potential alternatives. If hardship is severe, beneficiaries may seek court intervention or request voluntary assistance from the charitable remainder beneficiary. Question 30. In a situation where formal requirements conflict with evolving legal standards, a financial planner is advising a client who wants to create an estate plan using electronic documents. The client wants to execute their will, trust, and power of attorney digitally without any physical signatures. The state has no laws explicitly permitting electronic estate planning documents. What is the best approach? A. Proceed with electronic execution since digital documents are widely accepted. B. Recommend that the client execute traditional paper documents to ensure validity. C. Rely on an online notary service to certify the digital signatures. D. Assume the documents will be legally binding under general contract principles. Answer: B. Recommend that the client execute traditional paper documents to ensure validity. Explanation: estate planning and digital documents. While electronic wills and trusts are gaining acceptance, most states still require traditional signatures and witnesses. Legal precedent and risk. Without clear statutory authorization, an electronic estate plan could be invalid in probate, leading to intestacy issues. Best practice: until laws recognize digital estate planning documents, executing physical, properly witnessed versions ensures legal validity.